I overheard my brother's fiancée plotting to take his $30,000. He punched me for telling the truth, then called a year later begging for forgiveness. My name's Alex, and I'm in my early 30s. My older brother, David, is a few years ahead of me. Growing up, we were pretty typical as brothers go. We weren't the kind of siblings who shared every detail or hung out constantly, but we got along fine. No big fights, no major drama. We'd catch up during holidays, see each other at family get-togethers, maybe grab a coffee or watch a game once in a while. Our parents are still together, and we've got a decently large extended family, plenty of aunts, uncles, and cousins who live nearby. We see them fairly often. David started dating this woman named Amy a couple of years before they got engaged. When I first met her, she came off as friendly enough, polite at dinners, held a regular job, and honestly seemed to make David happy. Our parents liked her too, which isn't always a given. They announced their engagement about 8 months before the wedding date I'm about to tell you about. Now, David's always been careful with money, borderline obsessive, even. He's had a steady job for years and is one of the most disciplined savers I know. He'd been working toward a big goal, saving up $30,000 to put toward a down payment on a house. He mentioned it to me more than once. That money was tucked away in a special high-yield savings account he'd had for a while, one that gave him some decent interest. The first red flag popped up a couple of months after their engagement. We were all at a family barbecue at our parents' house. People were scattered around the backyard and porch. I happened to be walking past a window at the back of the house when I caught Amy's voice drifting out. She was on the phone. I couldn't make out every word, some of the audio cut in and out, but I caught just enough to make me freeze. She was talking about money. I clearly heard her say $30,000, then something about moving it, and then she mentioned crypto. There was this light, breathy laugh that followed. Then I heard her say, "He won't even notice for ages." That was all I caught before the conversation moved out of earshot. But her tone and the words she used made it sound like she was up to something shady. She threw in a line about our future, but the way she said it made it feel like it was about her future, not a future with David. And it really seemed like she was planning to take that money from him. I couldn't shake it, especially after David had just told me not long before that he had $30,000 set aside for his house fund. Over the next week, I tried to bring it up with him in a low-key way. I asked how his savings were coming along, whether he was close to his goal. His response felt off. He just said things were fine, that everything was on track, but with none of his usual pride. Normally, he'd go into detail about interest rates or budgeting strategies. This time, he shut it down fast. That's when I really started paying attention. Amy suddenly had a shiny new bracelet I hadn't seen before, definitely expensive looking. Then, she went on a weekend trip with her friends that seemed pricey and came out of nowhere. On their own, those things might not mean much. But put together with what I'd overheard, it didn't sit right. Eventually, I decided I had to say something. I asked David to grab coffee somewhere we could talk privately. I told him exactly what I'd heard, calmly, clearly. I said I overheard Amy on the phone, mentioning $30,000, moving money, and crypto. I explained where I was when I heard it and why it made alarm bells go off in my head, especially knowing about his savings plan. His reaction was immediate and not good. He got mad. Said I must have misunderstood or misheard. Accused me of being jealous because he was settling down before I was. He flat out refused to believe Amy could do anything like that. He said they were fully transparent with each other, even about money. I pointed out the new jewelry, the expensive trip, and asked where that money came from. I suggested, just to be sure, that he double-check the balance in that savings account. But after that, he clammed up. Told me he trusted Amy completely and accused me of stirring up drama for no reason. A few days later, I tried one last time. I sent him a text laying everything out again, hoping maybe he'd read it in a quiet moment and think it over. He just replied, "Leave it alone, Alex. You are wrong." Things between us got awkward after that. He stopped returning my calls right away, and when we did talk, it felt cold, like we were strangers going through the motions. Their engagement party was coming up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that David was making a huge mistake. I couldn't stand the idea of Amy getting away with stealing money he worked so hard to save, and him walking down the aisle completely blind to it. It felt like my responsibility, as his brother, to at least try to stop it. Sure, I considered staying quiet. But the thought of her pulling this off, of David finding out years later after everything was too tangled to undo, it made me sick. As the party drew closer, the tension only got worse. David was clearly irritated that I wouldn't drop the issue, and I was even more convinced I was right. Frustrated, angry, and worried. The engagement party was at this rented hall, nothing fancy, but big enough for the crowd. Probably around 80 people, family, friends, a mix of both sides. There were speeches planned, decorations, food stations. Everyone was congratulating the couple. Amy and David were mingling, making the rounds. My parents pulled me aside earlier and told me not to cause a scene. That only made me more unsure about what to do. Seeing David laughing and smiling with Amy when I was nearly certain she'd taken his money behind his back was almost unbearable. I kept thinking, if I don't say something now, I never will. Eventually, I decided talking to him one-on-one again wasn't going to work. He'd already dismissed me twice. I figured the only way to break through was to say it publicly. I hoped that the shock might snap David out of his denial, or maybe, just maybe, make Amy react in a way that gave her away. There was a quiet moment between speeches when most guests were sitting down. I was standing near the little stage area and saw a microphone someone had left there. My heart was pounding, but I stepped up and grabbed it. Everything stopped. People turned to look. Confused faces. David and Amy were across the room near the family tables. I took a breath and spoke into the mic. I introduced myself as David's brother and said I had something important to say about Amy. My parents looked stunned. David's face shifted from puzzled to furious in seconds. I said I overheard Amy talking about taking $30,000 from David's savings and moving it into crypto without him knowing. I told the room I'd already tried telling David, but he didn't believe me, and I felt like I had no choice but to say it here, in front of everyone, because this was something everyone, including both families, deserved to know. The reaction was instant. Shouting. People standing. Amy gasped loudly and burst into tears, covering her face with both hands. As soon as I finished speaking at the engagement party, I heard David shout my name. His face was flushed red with fury as he shoved his way through the crowd toward the stage. People from Amy's side were already yelling at me, and my parents were waving their arms, practically begging me with their eyes to stop whatever I was doing. The whole room was buzzing, whispers, people rising out of their chairs, some trying to get a better view. David finally reached me near the stage, and he didn't even try to keep his voice down. The second he got close, he punched me square in the face, no warning, just rage. The hit made me stumble back a few steps. He was yelling that I was making everything up, trying to destroy his life, accusing me of being insane. Amy's mom rushed over and was holding her while Amy kept crying like she'd just been attacked out of nowhere. David pointed right at me, told me to leave, said I wasn't welcome at the party or in his life. Security guards, who had been hired for the event, rushed in because of the yelling and the punch. David told them to get me out. Amy's family started shouting too, telling security to remove me. My parents stayed seated, looking completely wrecked and overwhelmed. They didn't step in to defend me. They just looked horrified and desperate to calm things down before it got worse. I set the mic down. At that point, there was no point in saying anything else. Nobody was listening. After getting punched and with everyone so riled up, I just let the security guys lead me out. They didn't manhandle me or anything, but they definitely didn't give me a choice. As they walked me toward the exit, David kept shouting behind me. Amy was still sobbing dramatically like she was the victim in all this. I glanced back at my parents right before I stepped outside. Their faces were filled with disbelief, shame, and disappointment, not just at what had happened, but that I'd been the one to trigger it all. Once I was outside the building, I stood there alone, still feeling the pain in my cheek from the punch. I walked away, trying to calm my thoughts. My phone started ringing not long after. It was my mom. Her voice was shaky, almost breaking. She didn't yell, but I could hear how upset she was. She told me I'd created a huge scene and embarrassed everyone, especially David and Amy. She said I'd pushed David into reacting violently, and while she didn't exactly say I deserved the punch, she made it sound like I'd brought it on myself by spreading lies during such an important night. She repeated everything David had said, that I was trying to sabotage his happiness, and that's what made him snap. According to her, David was completely convinced I was lying, and now he didn't want anything to do with me. She said it would be better, at least for a while, if I stayed away from any family gatherings, especially until things calmed down after the wedding. It became pretty obvious that my parents were siding with David. They were more focused on keeping the peace and protecting the wedding plans than trying to figure out whether what I said might have actually been true. Over the next couple of days, I got more calls. A few relatives said they were shocked by how physical things got. Some said I'd gone too far. A few asked me questions, but even they mostly just encouraged me to apologize and try to smooth things over. That wasn't something I could do, though, not when I still believed Amy had stolen from my brother and manipulated him. And not after David hit me in front of everyone. He didn't return any of my texts or answer any calls. As far as I could tell, he'd completely cut me out of his life. The weeks that followed were rough. I was on my own. My face stayed bruised for a few days, but what hurt more was the silence. I wasn't included in anything related to the wedding. When I saw family, conversations were stiff and uncomfortable. It was like no one really knew how to act around me anymore. David and Amy had already spread their version of the story, that I just made something up to stir the pot, and David's reaction was justified. My parents didn't completely shut me out, but the relationship changed. They kept their distance. They were clearly caught in the middle, but leaning toward David. I got the sense they were hoping everything would blow over eventually if we all just pretended nothing happened. Nobody ever followed up on what I'd said about the money. No one asked David to check his savings account. No one confronted Amy. All that mattered to the family was the scene I caused and the damage they thought it had done to David and Amy's big moment. Despite all that, the wedding went ahead as scheduled a few months later. I wasn't invited, and I didn't expect to be. I stayed home that day and kept to myself. I threw myself into work and leaned on a few close friends. They knew what had gone down and listened without judgment. They didn't try to fix it. They just let me talk. David and Amy never reached out. My relationship with my parents became more formal, like we were just going through the motions. We steered clear of anything uncomfortable. Everyone knew David had cut me off, but nobody really addressed it. I'd hear little updates about them here and there, mostly from my mom. Nothing ever sounded out of the ordinary. Then, almost 6 months after the wedding, things started to shift. My mom's tone changed when she talked about David. She was more hesitant, like she didn't want to say too much. She mentioned that David seemed tense, and that he and Amy had been fighting more often. At first, she didn't give any details, just said there were marriage issues. But a few days later, she called me specifically, something she rarely did anymore, and I could tell right away it wasn't just a casual check-in. She was clearly upset. Her voice was tight, and she sounded like she was holding back tears. She told me David had discovered some messages on Amy's phone and conversations with other men. Not just friendly chats, stuff that clearly crossed the line for a married woman. She said Amy had been messaging at least 3 different guys, and one of them was a guy David actually knew, someone from his gym. David hadn't gone looking for anything, apparently. He just stumbled across it. When he confronted Amy, it blew up into a huge fight. Amy didn't deny it, but she tried to brush it off, like it wasn't that serious. She even tried to flip it on him, blaming him somehow. My mom didn't know how long it had been going on or how deep it went, but David was crushed not just because of the cheating, but because of the betrayal, the lying. From what I've heard, things between them are a mess now. They're still living in the same place, but the tension is thick. Constant fighting. Everyone in the family's heard about it at this point, and all the attention is on the cheating. Oddly enough, no one's brought up the $30,000 again. That whole part of the story, the thing I warned about months ago, isn't even being mentioned. It's like it doesn't exist in their version of events. Right now, David's dealing with a broken marriage. The same marriage he threw me out over, the one he fought so hard to defend, is falling apart because of the very woman I tried to warn him about. It's starting to feel like the consequences of David putting all his trust in Amy and completely ignoring my warnings are finally showing up. Even though the current issue is different from what I warned him about, the bigger picture hasn't changed. This isn't really about whether I should reach out to David about the cheating, because that's not even an option. He cut me off, and that door's been shut for a while now. What's been eating at me is the situation as a whole. I'm still on the outside looking in, still shut out of my brother's life because I tried to warn him that his fiancée might have stolen from him. And now, 6 months after the wedding that basically ended our relationship, he's finding out that his wife has been lying to him just like I said she would. Sure, the lie he's dealing with now is about cheating, not money. But it still proves my point, Amy isn't the trustworthy person he thought she was. And while some people in the family are finally starting to see who Amy really is, the core issue from the engagement party, the fact that David cut me out of his life, is still very much there. I'm still on the outside, watching everything fall apart from a distance. Update 1. First off, thanks to everyone who read the first post and shared their thoughts. A few points kept coming up that I want to explain a little better. A lot of people asked if I had any hard proof beyond overhearing Amy's phone conversation. The honest answer? No, I didn't. All I had was what I heard and the way David suddenly acted different about his finances, plus Amy's spending habits that didn't seem to line up with her job. I couldn't see David's bank accounts, and I had no access to Amy's financials or whether she was messing around with crypto. I tried to convince David to check his own accounts, but he just refused. That lack of concrete evidence was a big reason no one believed me. To them, I looked like I was just stirring the pot for no reason. But the conversation I heard was specific. Amy mentioned $30,000, something about moving it, crypto, and how David wouldn't notice. It didn't sound like a joke. It sounded sneaky. Still, I'll admit, it was just something I overheard, not a confession or some paper trail. Some folks also asked whether anyone else might have heard that conversation. It's possible, but unlikely. The barbecue was noisy, and Amy was inside near an open window while I was outside. Unless someone else happened to be walking by at the same time and paying attention, I doubt they caught it. If anyone else did hear it, they sure didn't speak up or react the way I did. Everything I said in my original post came directly from that moment and how it tied into what I already knew about David's careful saving habits. He wasn't the kind of guy who'd blow through $30,000 without noticing unless someone was moving it in a way that didn't trigger alarms right away. Amy didn't make enough at her job to be casually buying expensive jewelry or taking surprise weekend trips without tapping into money that probably wasn't hers. Another thing I saw in the comments was people wondering if I should have just kept it private, maybe handled it differently instead of saying something in front of everyone at the party. But I did try. I told David privately, more than once. I laid out my concerns, told him what I'd heard, and urged him to check his finances. Every single time, he shut me down, got mad, called me jealous, and refused to even consider the possibility. Speaking out at the party was a last-ditch move. Yeah, I knew it was risky. But I thought maybe the public shock would snap him out of it or force Amy to react in a way that gave something away. I was desperate, and it blew up in my face. After posting that first story and reading through everyone's comments, some saying I was right about Amy, others saying I handled it all wrong, I've had time to think about where I stand. Honestly, not much has changed since then. David still isn't talking to me. The wedding happened. And now, through my mom, I'm hearing that Amy's been cheating on him. The outcome I feared, him getting hurt, is now playing out. And I'm still not part of his life. I'm not thinking about what to do about their marriage. That's not mine to fix. What I've been trying to figure out is whether there's anything I should do about my own relationship with David now that more people are realizing I wasn't crazy after all. Some people suggested this might be a good time to reach out, that maybe David would finally listen now that things are going south. But the truth is, when I look back at everything that happened over the past year, it's hard to believe anything good would come from that. I didn't just get brushed off. I got punched. I got banned from family events. And I lost my relationship with my brother. He didn't just doubt me, he treated me like a threat to his life and future. He made his position clear the day of that engagement party and again when he went through with marrying Amy without me there. Even now, with Amy's lies out in the open, that doesn't undo the damage to our bond. That doesn't magically rebuild trust. I put everything on the line trying to protect him, and he cut me out like I was nothing. Reaching out now, even without saying the words "I told you so," would still feel like I was rubbing it in. And let's be honest, if he's only willing to hear me because his life's unraveling, that's not a real reconciliation. That's desperation. Being cut off wasn't some short-term break. It was his way of showing me exactly where I stood. And honestly, I don't think chasing after him now would lead to anything good. So, I've decided not to reach out. No text. No call. No showing up. I've kept my distance, and I'm going to keep it that way. The ball's in his court, if it ever gets picked up again. I made a choice to keep things with my parents exactly as they'd been, limited and surface level. I kept answering their calls and replying to messages, but I didn't go digging for more details about what was going on with David, and I didn't offer my opinion on Amy's cheating or how it related to the warning I gave months earlier. I just listened quietly when they mentioned the fights or said David was having a hard time, never once using it as a chance to say "I told you so." It was the same whenever other family members brought it up. I'd just say I'd heard there were problems, and leave it at that. I avoided rehashing what I did at the engagement party or bringing up the past at all. And honestly, doing that didn't change much. David still didn't reach out. He stayed silent, and I think the drama in his marriage gave him more than enough to focus on. My conversations with my parents stayed polite but strained. I could tell they were struggling, upset about what was happening to David and maybe a little uncertain now about everything that had gone down before. But they never tried to bridge the gap between us. They didn't say Amy's actions proved I was right, either. The family talk stayed focused on the cheating, nothing else. Update 2. It's been about 6 months since I wrote that last update. Which means it's been about a year since David and Amy got married, and around 18 months since I first overheard Amy talking about the $30,000. A lot has changed since David found those messages on Amy's phone. According to what I've heard from my mom and a cousin who still checks in with me now and then, things got really bad between David and Amy right after he confronted her. They didn't split up instantly, but they were basically just coexisting in the same space, barely speaking unless they were yelling at each other. The tension was non-stop. More details about Amy's messages came out as time went on. And it wasn't just harmless flirting, she was involved in full-on emotional and probably physical relationships with multiple guys. One of them was a guy David actually knew from his gym. Apparently, when David first confronted him, The guy tried to deny everything. But when David showed him the texts, he had no choice but to admit it. That made things even worse, betrayed by a friend on top of everything else. A few weeks later, Amy finally moved out. They didn't go through the divorce paperwork right away, but their relationship was over in every real sense. They weren't living together, and there was nothing left to salvage. The marriage was hanging on by legal technicalities, not by love or trust. David was devastated, not just by the cheating, but by the realization that the woman he defended so fiercely, the one he pushed his own brother out of his life for, had lied to his face and done it all deliberately. And here's what's interesting: now that Amy's lies are undeniable, some family members who backed David up during the engagement party have started softening a bit. They're not exactly lining up to apologize, but the certainty they once had about me being in the wrong isn't as strong anymore. My mom, especially, has been more open in how she talks about things. She hasn't come right out and said I'm sorry for not believing me or for siding with David so hard, but you can hear it in her voice. The disappointment she feels toward Amy is obvious now. She's even said a few things about how David should have trusted his gut, which is probably as close as she's going to get to admitting I had a point. Still, none of that has changed the fact that David and I are still distant. He's been too busy dealing with everything Amy's done and figuring out the logistics of separating, dividing stuff, handling the emotional fallout, all of it. My life has stayed completely separate from his. I just hear the updates secondhand, and I've stuck to my decision not to reach out. From my spot on the sidelines, I've watched his choices play out. He ignored a warning from someone who cared about him. He went ahead and married someone I truly believed was dishonest. And now he's picking up the pieces of a life that blew up because that same person turned out to be exactly who I said she was, just in a different way. It's a tough reminder that if you ignore the signs that someone might not be honest, it's only a matter of time before those lies catch up with you, even if the damage doesn't come from the place you expected. Small update. A few days ago, something happened that I didn't see coming. David called me. It was the first time I'd heard his voice in over a year. He didn't launch into everything all at once. There was a long pause at the start. Then, slowly, he began talking about the engagement party, about what I said that night and how he'd reacted. He told me I was right. He admitted that cutting me out was a mistake. He apologized for not believing me when I tried to warn him, and even apologized for hitting me in front of everyone. He said his reaction had been way over the line, even if he was shocked and angry at the time. He explained that when I kept pushing the issue even after he asked me to drop it, it felt like I was turning his private life into a public spectacle. That's what made him snap. That's what made him throw the punch. And then he talked about the money. He said after he discovered the cheating, he started going back through other things that hadn't made sense. One of them was his finances. He told me that months earlier, long before the wedding, Amy had come to him saying she needed a large loan, around $30,000. She said her friend needed emergency surgery and didn't have the money, and Amy wanted to help. David believed her and wired her the money. She made him promise not to tell anyone. Said her friend was private, didn't want the situation talked about, didn't want anyone to know she was struggling. That's why David never mentioned it, not even to me. But after the affair came to light, David started asking harder questions. He pushed Amy for details. He looked into her story. And eventually, he discovered the whole thing had been made up. There was no surgery. No friend in trouble. Amy had lied to get the money. She used it for herself. Probably for crypto, just like I heard her say. That line I overheard, "he won't even notice for ages," finally made sense to David. Amy hadn't meant he wouldn't notice it was missing. She meant he wouldn't realize the loan was fake, that it would take him a long time to figure out that it was never coming back. When he confronted her, she admitted it. But she refused to return the money, claimed it was a gift, or said it was gone, or made up other excuses. David's pretty sure it's sitting in some crypto wallet somewhere, but either way, it's gone. Hearing him say all this was surreal. He wasn't emotional or dramatic. He just laid it out. He acknowledged the truth about Amy. He admitted I was right. He owned up to how badly he had treated me. And now, I don't know where that leaves us. He reached out. He said the things I never thought I'd hear. He was honest. But after everything, I'm not sure if I'm ready to forgive him. Not yet.